In this section, we'll solve quadratic equations by factoring. Now, we did factoring in Module 13, so if you need to remember how to do it, if you've forgotten, then go back and look at those notes. The idea is that we put quadratic equation into standard form so that we can factor. Then we factor the quadratic equation. Then we set each factor equal to 0, and we solve the smaller equations. This problem is already factored. We have 6x and an x plus 5. So we can just start with step 3, actually, where we set each factor equal to 0. That's why it has to equal 0 to begin with, be in standard form. Over here, we'll solve this equation by dividing by 6, and 0 divided by 6 is 0. So here's one answer. Remember, we should get two answers. Here we'll subtract 5, and we get x is equal to negative 5. This problem is also already factored, so we can just set each factor equal to 0. And we'll solve each smaller equation. We'll add 3 to both sides, and that gives us 3 as one of our answers. Here we'll subtract 3 from both sides, and that gives us 5x equals negative 3, and then we'll divide both sides by 5, and we get x equals negative 3/5. So again, two answers because it's a quadratic equation. So in this problem, it's not already factored. In fact, it's not equal to 0 yet. So what we need to do is add the 4x to both sides to make it equal 0. When we write this left side, we want to write the x squared first, and then the 4x, and then the minus 12 so that it is in standard form. And now we want to factor that left-hand side. So first of all, we look for a greatest common factor, and there is not one. And then we ask ourselves how many terms there are. There's 3 terms. It's a trinomial. So we take 1 times negative 12, a times c, and I get negative 12. So I'm trying to multiply to get negative 12 and add to get 4. That pair of numbers that does that is 6 and a negative 2. Those multiply to get negative 12 and add to get negative 4. So I put a over 6 and a over negative 2. There's an x in both spots, so I read this straight down to write my two factors. I would get 1x or x plus 6 and 1x or x minus 2 equals 0. That allows me to write my two equations, x plus 6 equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. Here we'll subtract 6 from both sides. That gives me x equals negative 6 as my first answer. And then I'll add 2 to both sides. And that gives me x equals 2 as my second answer. This again is not in standard form because it's not equal to 0. So I'll write this as 3c squared minus 10c minus 8 equals 0. Now I need to factor. There's no greatest common factor on the left-hand side. So I need to take a times c, and I get negative 24. So I'm trying to find two numbers that multiply to get negative 24 and add to get negative 10. So we could list our options: 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. If I want both of those to be negative, the bigger number has to be negative. And I see here's my numbers right there, 2 and negative 12. So I'll write 3 over 2 and 3 over negative 12. This one reduces to 1 over negative 4. And there is a c at the beginning, so this is c, and this has a c. And now I can write my parentheses. I have 3c plus 2 and c minus 4 equals 0. That allows me to write my two equations. I'll have 3c plus 2 equals 0, and c minus 4 equals 0. So I'll start by solving this one by adding 2 to both sides. And then I'll divide by 3. And c is equal to 2/3. Here I'll add 4. So I get c is equal to 4. So this we need to put in standard form again. So we'll start by adding 2x to both sides. So I get 5x squared plus 29x equals 42. And then I need to subtract 42 from both sides. So I get 5x squared plus 29x minus 42 equals 0. Now there's no greatest common factor here. It's a trinomial, so I need to take 5 times negative 42. That gives me negative 210. So I'm looking for two things that multiply to get negative 210 and add to get 29. So 1 times 210, 2 times 105, 3 times 70, 4 doesn't work, 5 times 42, 6 times 35, 7 times 30, 8 doesn't work, 9 doesn't work, be 10 times 21, 11 doesn't work, 12 doesn't work, 13 doesn't work, 14 times 15. Now I want to multiply to get a negative number but add to get a positive number. That tells me my smaller number should be negative. And if I look, this is my pair right here. So I have a negative 6 and a 35. Now I'm going to erase my factoring so that I have room to work the problem. Remember, this tells me I need to now put 5 over each of those. So I have 5 over negative 6, and that can't be reduced, so I have one pair right there. And then 5 over 35 can be reduced, that's 1 over 7. So here's my other pair right here. So I have 5x minus 6 and x plus 7 equals 0. Now I can write my two equations. 5x minus 6 equals 0. And x plus 7 equals 0. I'll solve this one first by adding 6 to both sides. And then divide by 5. X equals 6/5 is my first answer. Here I'll subtract 7 and get x equals negative 7 as my second answer.